My name is Willow, and I'm 32 years old now, though the story I'm about to tell you happened a few years back, when I was 28. I live on the same piece of land my family has worked for over 200 years, a sprawling, stubborn farmstead nestled in the heart of the North Yorkshire moors. It's a life of early mornings, calloused hands, and a quiet conversation with the seasons. It's a life my London cousin, Serafina, considered a tragedy. I never expected that the very skills she found so pitiably primitive would one day be all that stood between her perfect, aristocratic fiancé and a frozen grave carved by a blizzard that came from nowhere. I never thought my quiet world would have to rescue her loud one, but the Moors have a way of demanding respect, and they don't care a bit about the cut of your suit or the balance in your bank account. Before I dive into the story of that brutal winter storm and the hunt that went so terribly wrong, I want to connect with all of you listening. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had your skills dismissed by someone who should have known better, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And of course, if you're new here and you want to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, please consider subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me. Now let's get back to that week when the glittering world of London society crashed headfirst into the unforgiving reality of the moors. It all started with the crunch of expensive tires on my gravel drive, a sound as alien here as a parrot in a flock of crows. I was mending a section of dry stone wall, the ancient, moss-covered stones fitting into my hands like pieces of a familiar puzzle, when a long, impossibly black car slid to a halt. The driver, a man in a stiff suit, got out and opened the passenger door with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. Out stepped Serafina. She was a vision in cream-colored cashmere and impossibly sharp heels that immediately began to sink into the soft earth. Her hair was a perfect, honey-blonde sculpture, and her smile was as bright and meaningless as a flash of winter sun. She looked around, her gaze sweeping over the windswept hills and the sturdy gray stone of the farmhouse, and her perfectly painted lips tightened just a fraction. It wasn't a look of admiration, it was a look of appraisal, and the verdict was clear: lacking. Behind her, a man unfolded himself from the car. He was tall, with that easy posture that comes from generations of not having to worry about money. He had dark hair, kind eyes, and a slightly bewildered expression as he took in the sheer, raw emptiness of the landscape. This was Lord Theo Beaumont, her fiancé. He was followed by another couple, Cassian and Beatrice, who looked like they'd stepped directly out of a magazine advertising lives of effortless leisure. Cassian was loud and hearty, with a booming laugh that seemed to startle the sheep in the nearby field. Beatrice was his opposite, cool, silent, and appraising, her eyes missing nothing and approving of very little. "Willow, darling." Serafina's voice was like chimes in a gale, too delicate for the space. She air-kissed me, her cheek cold and smelling of a perfume that cost more than my weekly groceries. "You look exactly the same. So wonderfully rustic." I wiped my earthy hand on my jeans before shaking Theo's. His grip was firm, his smile genuine. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Willow. Serafina's told me so much about you. This place is magnificent." I saw a flicker of annoyance cross Serafina's face before she smoothed it over with a laugh. "Oh, Theo, you're too kind. It's certainly vast. Now can we please get these bags inside? The air is positively agricultural." That was how it began. The little barbs, the condescending remarks wrapped in the tissue paper of false compliments. For the next few days, our farmhouse became a stage for their world, and I was the quaint local scenery. They unpacked clothes that filled every closet and spilled over chairs, fabrics of silk and wool that seemed to shrink from the honest dust of a working farm. Serafina would watch me in the mornings as I went out to check the livestock, my boots caked in mud, my hair whipped into a mess by the wind. She'd be sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in a silk robe, sipping coffee from a mug she'd brought herself because mine were too clunky. "I just don't understand the appeal," she said one morning, watching me pull off my muddy boots by the door. "All this effort, for what? Don't you ever wish you could just call for takeout?" "There's no takeout here, Serafina," I replied calmly, lining my boots up on the mat, "and I like knowing where my food comes from. There's a satisfaction in it." She made a little sound of pity. "Oh, of course. The simple pleasures, how sweet." Her friends were no better. Cassian treated the farm like his personal playground, making loud, clueless jokes about the animals. "Say, Willow, ever tried to ride one of those sheep? Bet it's a bumpy ride." Beatrice would simply drift through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the old oak furniture, as if checking for dust, her expression one of perpetual mild disappointment. The only one who seemed genuinely interested was Theo. He would follow me out sometimes, asking questions that were surprisingly thoughtful. He wanted to know about the different breeds of sheep, why the stone walls were built without mortar, how I could tell which way the wind would shift just by looking at the clouds. He had a quiet curiosity that Serafina seemed to find irritating. "Theo, for heaven's sake, stop bothering Willow with your tedious questions," she'd call from the doorway. "You'll have her thinking you want to become a farmer. Come inside, darling. Beatrice has opened a simply divine bottle of wine." Theo would give me an apologetic smile in retreat, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was drawn to the authenticity of the place, to the reality of it, but he was tethered to Serafina's world of curated perfection. The mockery reached its peak on the third night. We were all gathered in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth. I was serving a stew I'd made from our own lamb and vegetables from the garden. It was rich and hearty, a perfect meal for a chilly autumn evening. Cassian took a bite and boomed, "I say, this is proper peasant fare. Stick to your ribs stuff." "Excellent, Willow." It was meant as a compliment, but it landed like a stone. Serafina seized the opportunity. "Oh, Willow is a marvel of practicality," she said, her voice dripping with false admiration. She turned to the group, her eyes glittering. "You should have seen her as a child. While I was at ballet lessons and learning French, Willow was out here, collecting feathers and learning to identify animal droppings. Weren't you, darling? I remember you had a whole, rather smelly collection of them in shoeboxes under your bed." The room fell silent for a moment, and I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. It was an old memory, a cruel exaggeration. I had been a curious child, fascinated by the natural world. She was twisting that curiosity into something strange and uncivilized for the amusement of her sophisticated friends. "I was interested in tracking," I said quietly, my voice tight. "It's about understanding the patterns of the animals that live here." Serafina laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Tracking. You see? So wonderfully primal. What on earth do you do with that knowledge, darling? Does a badger send you a thank you note for knowing where it's been? It's all rather useless in the real world, isn't it?" Theo shifted uncomfortably. "I think it's fascinating, actually. It's a real skill. Most of us can barely navigate our way out of a department store without a map." "Don't be silly, Theo," Serafina snapped, her smile unwavering. "That's what we have phones for. Willow's skills are from another century. Quaint, but ultimately obsolete." I didn't say anything else. I just stood there, holding the heavy ladle, and let her words wash over me. It wasn't just the insult. It was the complete, unshakable certainty with which she dismissed my entire life, my entire world. To her, everything I knew, everything I was a relic, a curiosity to be pitied and then forgotten. My knowledge of the land wasn't a skill, it was a symptom of a life unlived. The next day, the men announced their plan. Cassian, ever the sportsman, had arranged for them to go on a grouse hunt on the upper moors. He'd brought expensive new shotguns, still gleaming in their cases, and a box of cigars to celebrate their inevitable success. They spoke of it as a grand adventure, a conquest of the wild. They laid out their tweed jackets and breeches, looking like a theatrical troupe dressing for a play about the landed gentry. That morning, I had felt it, a change in the air. It was more than the usual autumn chill. There was a stillness, a strange, heavy quality to the light. The wind, which was usually a constant presence, had dropped to an unnerving whisper, and it was coming from the northeast, a direction that always put my teeth on edge. The sheep were restless, huddled together in the lee of the stone walls, their calls sounding anxious and clipped. I found them in the kitchen, poring over a map of the estate that was more decorative than practical. "You shouldn't go out today," I said, my voice cutting through their cheerful chatter. They all looked up. Serafina raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. And why ever not? "The weather is turning," I said, walking over to the window and looking out at the sky. It was a strange, bruised shade of gray, with a yellowish tint on the horizon. I don't like the feel of it. When the wind drops like this and the sky goes that color, it means something bad is coming. It's not just a bit of rain. The moors can turn on you in minutes. Cassian let out a great booming laugh. "Oh, come now, Willow. A bit of weather won't hurt us. We're not city softies, you know. Got all the latest gear, waterproof, thermal, the lot. We'll be fine." "Your gear won't matter if you can't see 5 feet in front of your face," I insisted, my unease growing into a cold knot of dread. "This isn't a park. There are bogs, hidden gullies. If a blizzard comes in, you can be lost and frozen before you even realize you're in trouble." Serafina stood up and walked over to me, placing a hand on my arm in a gesture of patronizing comfort. "Willow, darling, you worry too much. It's what happens when you're cooped up here all the time. You see disaster in every cloud. It's just a little country weather. We'll be back for tea, I promise. Don't be such a prophet of doom." She turned to Theo, her voice bright and commanding. "Come on, darling. Let's not let Willow's rustic superstitions spoil our fun." I looked at Theo, hoping he might listen. I had seen the genuine curiosity in his eyes. Surely he could see the sense in my warning. He met my gaze, and for a moment I saw a flicker of doubt. He looked out the window, then back at the confident, smiling faces of his friends. The pressure of their expectations, of their world, was too strong. He gave me a small, apologetic shrug. "We'll be careful, Willow, I promise." And with that, they clapped each other on the back, picked up their gleaming guns, and headed out into the deceptive calm. I stood at the window and watched them go, their figures shrinking as they walked up the path towards the high moor. Their laughter carried back on the strange, silent air. The knot of dread in my stomach tightened until it felt like a cold, hard stone. They were walking into the teeth of the moor's fury, armed with nothing but their own arrogance, and they had no idea. I spent the next hour trying to distract myself with chores, but the silence of the house was heavy with foreboding. The wind began to pick up, not with the familiar, steady push of a normal day, but in strange, violent gusts that rattled the window panes. It was a hungry sound. I went outside to secure the chicken coop and bring the extra firewood onto the porch. The sky had darkened to a deep, ominous charcoal. The first flakes of snow began to fall, not the gentle, drifting kind, but small, hard pellets that stung my cheeks. They were driven by a wind that was quickly rising to a vicious howl. Within half an hour, the world outside the farmhouse windows had dissolved into a churning, chaotic whiteness. It wasn't just a snowstorm, it was a blizzard, a genuine whiteout. The snow wasn't falling anymore, it was moving horizontally, a thick, impenetrable curtain that erased the landscape. The familiar shapes of the hills, the stone walls, the old oak tree by the gate, they were all gone, swallowed by the maelstrom. The wind shrieked around the corners of the house, a physical, pressing force that seemed to be trying to tear the old stones apart. This was the moors showing their true face, the one that the glossy travel brochures never show you. It was a wild, untamable power, and out in the middle of it were 4 people who thought it was just a little country weather. Serafina and Beatrice sat by the fire, trying to maintain an air of bored sophistication, but I could see the cracks in their composure. Beatrice kept glancing nervously at the window, her teacup rattling in its saucer. Serafina was flicking through a magazine with a little too much concentration, her brow furrowed. "They should be back by now, shouldn't they?" Beatrice asked, her voice thin. "They're fine," Serafina said, not looking up from her page. "Theo is incredibly capable, and Cassian practically lives outdoors. They're probably just holed up in a pub somewhere, laughing at the storm." "There are no pubs on the high moor, Serafina," I said quietly from the other side of the room, where I was checking the battery levels on my torches. She shot me a venomous look. Well, they found shelter somewhere, obviously. They're not idiots. But the hours ticked by. 2 o'clock became 3, then 4. The light outside began to fade, the swirling white turning to a menacing gray. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it intensified. The house groaned under the assault of the wind. Every so often, a gust would hit with such force that it felt like a physical blow. The cheerful fire in the hearth seemed like a tiny, fragile bastion against the raw fury of the elements. The facade of calm finally shattered when the back door burst open with a crash, driven by a blast of wind and snow. 2 figures stumbled in, looking like ghosts. It was Cassian and the estate's gamekeeper, a stoic local man named George who had gone with them. They were covered in snow, their faces red and raw from the wind, their eyes wide with a terror that cut through their expensive tweed. Cassian was gasping for breath, his usual booming voice reduced to a ragged whisper. He's not with us." Serafina leapt to her feet, the magazine falling to the floor. "What are you talking about? Where's Theo?" "He's gone," Cassian stammered, shaking his head, his whole body trembling from cold and shock. "He's still out there. We got separated. He went after a bird, just over a ridge, and then this thing came down on us. 1 minute he was there, the next, nothing, just white. We called and called, but you can't hear anything in that wind. We couldn't see a thing." Serafina's face went completely pale. "What do you mean you couldn't see him? You just left him." "We tried to find him." Cassian's voice cracked. "We searched for as long as we could, but we were getting lost ourselves. George said if we didn't turn back, we'd all die out there. We thought he might have found his own way back." Panic exploded in the room. It was a raw, ugly thing. Serafina grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. "I'm calling Mountain Rescue. I'm calling the police." "There's no signal," I said, my voice cutting through her frantic cries. "There hasn't been since the storm started. And even if you could get through, no one is getting up here. The lane will be blocked by now. A helicopter can't fly in this wind. They're on their own." The reality of my words settled over them like a shroud. Their money, their connections, their phones, all the tools of their powerful modern world were utterly useless. They were trapped, isolated, and completely terrifyingly helpless. The confidence they had worn like armor that morning had been stripped away, leaving them shivering and afraid. Beatrice started to sob quietly in a corner. Cassian sank into a chair, his head in his hands, muttering, "We should have listened. Oh God, we should have listened." Serafina rounded on me, her eyes blazing with a desperate, misplaced fury. "This is your fault. You live here. You should have stopped them. You should have done something." It was the terrified lashing out of a cornered animal. I looked at her tear-streaked face and her trembling hands, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The time for panic was over. The time for anger was a luxury we couldn't afford. All that was left was the cold, hard problem of a man alone on the moor in a killer storm. "Getting angry at me won't bring him back, Serafina," I said, my voice low and steady. It silenced the room. I warned them. They didn't listen. What's done is done. Now this is what's going to happen. I became a different person in that moment. The quiet, overlooked country cousin was gone. In her place was someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. My voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Cassian, George, get out of those wet clothes now. Beatrice, put the kettle on again and find every blanket in this house. Serafina, stop crying and listen to me. We have a window of maybe a few hours before hypothermia becomes irreversible. A rescue team won't get here until morning at the earliest. By then, they'll be looking for a body. I am the only chance he has." I strode over to the wall where a large, detailed topographical map of the estate was hanging. I unrolled it on the big kitchen table. "Show me," I commanded, looking at Cassian and George. "Show me exactly where you were. Not roughly, exactly." Their accounts were confused, disjointed by panic. Cassian pointed to one area, George to another. But I listened, filtering out the fear and focusing on the details. A distinctive rocky outcrop, a stand of stunted birch trees, the direction of the ridge he'd gone over. I pieced it together, my finger tracing a path on the map, my mind building a three-dimensional picture of the terrain, overlaying it with the wind direction and the likely path a lost person would take. While I did that, I prepared. I pulled on my own gear, not fashionable tweed, but layers of wool and fleece, and on top, a heavy waxed cotton jacket that was stained and worn but had never let me down. My boots were thick leather, waterproofed with dubbin, their soles heavy and cleated. I filled a flask with scalding hot tea, adding a generous amount of sugar and a splash of whiskey, not for drinking, but for revival. I packed high-energy food, mint cake, dried fruit, a block of chocolate. I checked the beam on my most powerful torch, a solid metal thing that could cut through the dark. I took a compass, a whistle, and a tightly folded emergency foil blanket. Everything had a purpose. There was no wasted space, no unnecessary weight. Serafina watched me, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. You're not actually going out there? In that? You'll be killed." I looked up from buckling my pack. For a moment I saw the full, terrifying reality of what I was about to do. She was right. The moor in a blizzard was a death trap. It didn't distinguish between the fool who wandered into it and the person who went in to save him. The chances of me finding him were slim. The chances of me getting lost or succumbing to the cold myself were terrifyingly real. A wave of doubt washed over me. What was I doing? This wasn't my responsibility. He wasn't my fiancé. His friend's arrogance wasn't my problem. Then I looked at their faces, at the utter helplessness, and I thought of Theo, the one person who had shown a glimmer of respect, of genuine interest. I thought of him out there, alone, freezing, paying the ultimate price for his friend's hubris. And I knew I couldn't stay here. My knowledge of this land wasn't a party trick or a quaint hobby. It was a responsibility. This was my home, and he was lost in it. Leaving him to die was not an option. This was no longer about proving Serafina wrong. It was about doing what was right. "Staying here is a death sentence for him," I said, my voice clear and resolved. "Going out there is a chance. I'll take the chance." I pulled on my hat and gloves, gave them one last set of instructions. Keep the outside light on, and keep a fire going in every hearth. If I get him back, he'll need to be warmed up slowly and carefully. Don't let him sleep until I say so. I walked to the door and opened it. The storm hit me like a physical blow, a solid wall of wind and ice that stole my breath. The noise was deafening, a relentless roaring chaos. Beyond the small pool of light from the porch, there was nothing but a swirling, impenetrable vortex of white. I took a deep breath, leaned into the wind, and stepped out into the blizzard. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was alone. The instant the door closed, the world vanished. I was in a place without dimension, without direction. The wind was a physical beast, clawing at my clothes, trying to push me off balance. The snow was not falling but flying, a horizontal blizzard of tiny ice shards that sandblasted my exposed skin and forced me to squint my eyes to tiny slits. The roaring sound was all-encompassing, filling my ears and my head, making thought difficult. It was a sensory overload designed to induce panic, to disorient and overwhelm. My first instinct was to turn back, to retreat to the warmth and safety of the house. I had to consciously fight it down, planting my feet firmly and taking a slow, deliberate breath. Panic was the enemy. Panic would get me killed. I pulled up my collar, lowered my head against the gale, and started walking. My first objective was to get clear of the immediate farm buildings so I could take a proper compass bearing. I moved by memory, counting my steps, feeling for the familiar turn in the path that led up towards the moor gate. Every step was a struggle. The snow was already drifting, calf-deep in places, and the wind was a constant, shoving pressure on my chest. Once I reached the gate, I paused in its slight lee, pulling out my compass. The needle trembled violently, but it held steady enough. I took the bearing I had calculated from the map. A line that would take me towards the area George had indicated was their last known position. Then I put the compass away and began the real work. Navigation in a whiteout isn't about looking. It's about feeling. I felt the slope of the land beneath my boots, registering the subtle incline that told me I was heading up onto the first ridge. I used the wind, which was holding steady from the northeast, as a constant reference point on my right cheek. I was building a mental map, placing myself in the landscape even when I couldn't see it. This was what Serafina had called useless, this deep ingrained knowledge of my home. I knew that after 70 paces the ground would level out. I knew that 100 paces after that I would cross the shallow depression where the stream ran in the summer, now just a dip filled with deeper snow. These were the details stored not in a phone, but in my muscles and my memory, learned over a lifetime of walking this land in every season, in every weather. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the area where they'd been hunting. Now the search began in earnest. Finding a man in this maelstrom was like looking for a single white stone on a vast white beach. Tracks were useless. Any print would be filled with snow in seconds. Shouting was pointless. The wind would tear the sound from my lips and shred it to nothing. I had to think, not like a rescuer, but like a lost man. Theo was a city person. His instinct would be to find shelter, what looked like shelter on the moors. He would look for rocks, for a dip in the ground, anything to get out of the wind. I remembered the brief conversation we'd had a few days prior. I had pointed out a distinctive formation of rocks on the skyline, a tor known locally as the Shepherd's Crown. He had been interested, asking about its name. It was a long shot, a wild guess, but it was all I had. People who are lost and disoriented often gravitate towards the last landmark they consciously registered. I adjusted my course, heading for where I knew the Shepherd's Crown lay. The terrain grew more difficult here, the ground littered with hidden rocks and treacherous patches of heather that could trip me. I fell once, my knee twisting painfully as my foot plunged into a hidden hole. I lay there for a moment, the snow piling up on my back, the cold seeping in. The temptation to just stay there, to close my eyes and let the deceptive warmth of exhaustion take over, was immense. It was a seductive, deadly thought. I forced it away, gritting my teeth against the pain in my knee, and pushed myself back to my feet, onwards. One step, then another. I was relying on my useless skills now, the ones Serafina had mocked so cruelly. I wasn't just looking, I was reading the landscape. I saw a line of heather that was bent, but its branches were snapped, not smoothly curved by the wind. Someone had pushed through here recently. A little further on, under a small overhang of peat, I saw it, a smudge of darkness against the white. I crawled closer, brushing the snow away. It was a single, spent shotgun cartridge. Gleaming, new, the kind Cassian had been showing off. I was on the right path. The discovery sent a surge of adrenaline through me, pushing back the cold and the exhaustion. He was here, somewhere close. I began to search with renewed urgency, sweeping my torch beam back and forth, trying to penetrate the wall of swirling snow. I called his name, though I knew it was hopeless. Theo. The wind ate the word. I moved along the base of the crags that formed the Shepherd's Crown, a place that would offer the most natural shelter. The snow was deeper here, drifted up against the rock face. I probed it with my walking stick, checking every hollow, every crevice, and then my stick hit something that wasn't rock. It was soft, yielding. I dropped to my knees and started digging frantically with my hands. The snow was light and fresh, easy to move. First I uncovered the sleeve of an expensive tweed jacket, then a shoulder, and finally a face, pale and rimmed with frost, eyes closed. It was Theo. He was curled into a fetal position, half buried in a drift that had likely saved him from the worst of the wind chill, but was now entombing him. I brushed the snow from his face and pressed my fingers to his neck. For a heart-stopping second, I felt nothing. Then, a faint, thready pulse. Slow, but there. He was alive. I couldn't carry him, not in his state and not in this storm. I had to get him conscious enough to help me. I unclipped my pack and went to work, my movements quick and efficient, driven by years of lambing ewes in freezing weather and dealing with farm emergencies. I pulled out the foil blanket and unrolled it, its crinkling sound loud even over the wind. I managed to get him out of his wet outer jacket, which was stiff with ice. His inner layers were damp. He was dangerously cold. I wrapped him tightly in the foil blanket, tucking it in around his body to trap any heat he was still producing. "Theo," I said, my voice loud and sharp, right by his ear. "Theo, you need to wake up now. Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. A low moan escaped his lips. "That's it. Open your eyes. Look at me." His eyes opened, but they were unfocused, glazed over. I unscrewed the top of my flask, the steam rising into the icy air. I put it to his lips. "Drink this. It's hot and sweet. You need the sugar." He could barely swallow, but I managed to get a few sips of the scalding tea into him. Color began to slowly return to his lips. "Theo, I'm going to get you home, but you have to help me. You have to stand up. You have to walk." Getting him to his feet was a monumental effort. He was dead weight, his limbs clumsy and unresponsive. I put my shoulder under his arm, took his weight, and heaved. We staggered upright, swaying in the wind. He leaned on me heavily, his head lolling. The journey back was going to be a special kind of hell. "Talk to me, Theo," I said, my voice strained with effort as we took our first shuffling step. "Tell me about London. Tell me about your flat. Anything. Just keep talking." He mumbled something incoherent. "Louder," I urged. "Come on, you can do it." Slowly, painfully, we began to move. Every step was a battle against the wind, the deep snow, and Theo's dead weight. My injured knee throbbed with every movement. He kept fading, his consciousness slipping away, and I would have to shake him, to shout his name, to force more hot tea into him. It was a brutal, agonizing crawl through the frozen chaos. I navigated by instinct, my internal compass the only thing guiding us. I didn't dare stop to rest, knowing that if we stopped, we might never start again. After what felt like a lifetime, after my muscles were screaming and my lungs were burning from the cold air, I saw it, a tiny faint pinprick of gold in the swirling gray darkness ahead. It wavered, disappeared, then returned. The light from the farmhouse, hope surged through me, giving me a final burst of strength. "Look, Theo, look, we're almost there." He lifted his head, and I think he saw it too. We stumbled the last few hundred yards, half falling through the drifts, driven by that single welcoming light. We practically collapsed against the back door, and I fumbled with the handle, my frozen fingers barely able to work. The door swung open, and we fell inside, into the warmth, into the light, into the shocked silence of the people waiting within. The scene that greeted us was one of frozen, horrified stillness. Serafina, Beatrice, and Cassian were huddled by the fire, their faces pale and etched with worry. When Theo and I stumbled through the door, a tangled mess of snow, exhaustion, and desperation, they all just stared. For a moment, nobody moved, as if they were looking at apparitions. I was holding Theo up, my entire body screaming with effort, and he was a limp, shuddering weight against me, his face the color of ash. Then, the spell broke. Serafina let out a choked cry and rushed forward. "Theo! Oh my God, Theo!" She reached for him, but I held up a hand, my voice coming out as a harsh, breathless rasp. "Don't crowd him. Get him to the fire." "Cassian, help me." Cassian, his face a mask of awe and shame, leaped to obey. Together we half-carried, half-dragged Theo to the large hearthrug in front of the fireplace. The warmth of the room was a shock to my system, and I started to tremble violently as the adrenaline began to recede. "Get his wet clothes off," I ordered, my voice gaining strength. "All of them. Beatrice, those blankets you gathered, bring them here. We need to warm him slowly." They moved now, their earlier helplessness replaced by a desperate need to do something, anything. But they were clumsy, their movements jerky with panic. Serafina fumbled with the buttons on Theo's shirt, her fingers shaking too much. "Not like that," I said, kneeling beside him despite the screaming protest from my knee. "You'll chafe his skin. Cut the clothes off if you have to." I took over, my own numb fingers surprisingly deft as I worked on his boots and trousers. I was operating on pure instinct, the practical knowledge of a farmer who has dealt with hypothermic lambs and calves my whole life. No direct heat, I instructed as Cassian moved to place a hot water bottle against Theo's skin. You'll shock his system. Just layers of dry blankets. Skin-to-skin contact is best if he doesn't improve. Serafina looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning, terrible respect. What do we do? Tell me what to do, Willow. It was a complete capitulation. The sophisticated London cousin, who just that morning had dismissed my entire existence, was now looking to me for salvation, her voice small and pleading. I just nodded and kept working, giving them quiet, clear instructions. We wrapped Theo in a cocoon of warm wool, elevating his feet, and I managed to get him to drink some warm, sweet broth I'd had simmering on the stove. Slowly, so slowly, the shivering subsided, and a little color returned to his cheeks and lips. Finally, his breathing evened out, and he fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Only then did the full weight of what had just happened settle into the room. The roar of the storm outside seemed distant now. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and Beatrice's soft, ragged sobs of relief. Cassian stood by the mantelpiece, staring into the flames, his face grim. He finally turned and looked at me. I had slumped into a nearby armchair, my body finally admitting its own exhaustion. He walked over and stood before me, his usual boisterous energy completely gone. We. He struggled for words, shaking his head. There's nothing I can say. We were arrogant fools. We almost killed him. You went out there. You saved his life. He looked down at his hands, then back at me, his eyes filled with a humility I never would have thought him capable of. I am so sorry, Willow, for everything. I just nodded. I was too tired for anger, too drained for lectures. His apology was genuine, born of a terror and a shame that he would likely never forget. That was enough. Later, after Beatrice had gone to her room and Cassian was keeping a quiet vigil by the fire, Serafina found me in the kitchen. I was standing at the counter, pressing a bag of frozen peas against my swollen knee, the simple cold a welcome relief. She didn't say anything at first. She just leaned against the doorframe, watching me. Her perfect hair was a mess, her expensive clothes were rumpled, and her face was stripped bare of all its usual artifice. She looked younger and terribly fragile. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. All this time, I've looked at you, at this place, and I thought you were stuck. I pitied you. I honestly thought your life was so small, so limited. She gave a short, bitter laugh that sounded like a sob. I came here to show off my perfect life, my perfect fiancé, my clever friends, to make you feel envious. She pushed herself off the doorframe and took a hesitant step into the room. Today, my perfect life was worthless. My money couldn't make a phone call. My clever friends stood around panicking. We would have let him die. We would have sat in this warm house, wringing our hands, and we would have let him freeze to death less than a mile away. Her composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, silent and heavy. And you went out into that hell. With your useless knowledge, your primitive skills, you saved him. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. My life is the one that's useless, Willow. It's all just decoration. There's nothing real in it. It was a confession, a complete unraveling of the person she had pretended to be. I looked at her, at my cousin who had spent her life mocking mine, and I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt a deep, profound sorrow for her. She had built her world on such fragile foundations, and the first real storm had blown it all down. I didn't offer her a hug or easy words of comfort. The moment was too raw for that. I simply looked at her, my own exhaustion a heavy cloak on my shoulders, and said the only thing that felt true. It's not about big lives or small lives, Serafina. It's about knowing who you are and knowing where you stand. This, I said, gesturing with my head towards the dark, stormy window and the land beyond it. This is where I stand. The morning after the storm was unnaturally beautiful. The wind had died completely, leaving behind a profound silence. The world was transformed, buried under a thick, pristine blanket of snow that softened every sharp edge and glittered under a pale, watery sun. The danger was gone, but the atmosphere inside the farmhouse remained irrevocably altered. The usual morning chatter was replaced by a quiet, reflective mood. Every clink of a spoon against a cup seemed amplified in the stillness. Theo was awake, sitting propped up with pillows on the sofa by the fire. He was pale and weak, but his eyes were clear. When I came into the room with a fresh cup of tea for him, he watched my every move. There was an intensity in his gaze that hadn't been there before. I handed him the mug, my hands steady now. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over by a train and then left in a freezer," he said, his voice raspy. He managed a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." He looked down into his tea, then back up at me. His expression was serious, stripped of all social grace. "You didn't just save my life, Willow. You did more than that." He paused, searching for the right words. Out there, when I realized I was lost, when the cold really started to bite, I've never felt so insignificant. Everything I thought was important, my title, my job in the city, the money, it all meant absolutely nothing. It was just me against all of that. He gestured towards the window, and I lost, badly. And then you came. You came out of the storm like you were a part of it. You weren't fighting it, you understood it. You knew what to do. You were real. He took a sip of tea, his eyes never leaving my face. "I think I've been living in a world of ghosts for a very long time. I think you showed me something I've been missing. Something solid." It was the most profound compliment I had ever received. It wasn't about being clever or brave. It was about being real. In that moment, there was a connection between us that went deeper than gratitude. It wasn't romantic, but it was a powerful bond forged in crisis, a moment of pure, unvarnished human understanding. He looked over at Serafina, who was hovering nervously nearby, and a complicated, sad expression crossed his face. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that his life had been knocked off its axis. He could no longer unsee the hollowness of the world he inhabited. Their engagement, their future, it was all now a question mark hanging in the air. Later that day, once George had managed to clear a path down the lane with his tractor, they packed to leave. The departure was a stark contrast to their boisterous arrival. Their expensive luggage seemed garish now, their city clothes theatrical and absurd. The goodbyes were quiet and strained. Cassian shook my hand, his grip firm, and met my eyes. "Thank you," he said, and the two words were loaded with a lifetime of newfound humility. Beatrice gave me a watery smile and a nod. Serafina was the last one. She came to me on the porch as I watched them load the final bags into the black car, which was now dusted with a layer of honest country snow. She didn't offer any more dramatic confessions. She just stood beside me, looking out at the white landscape. "I'll be in touch," she said quietly. It wasn't a promise of social calls. It felt like something else, a tentative first step towards rebuilding a bridge she had almost burned for good. Then she did something that shocked me. She hugged me. Not an air kiss, not a society embrace, but a real hug, her arms wrapping tightly around me. "Thank you, Willow," she whispered against my shoulder. I stood on the porch and watched the car pull away, its black shape shrinking against the vast white canvas of the moors until it disappeared. The silence it left behind was peaceful. It was clean. My vindication wasn't a loud, triumphant thing. It wasn't about rubbing her face in her mistake or basking in their praise. It was this quiet, this deep, unshakable sense of peace that settled in my soul. I looked at my hands, no longer seeing calluses, but seeing capability. I looked out at the land, no longer seeing my isolation, but seeing my home, my partner, a force I understood and respected. My skills weren't primitive, they were elemental. My world wasn't small. It was rooted, and in those roots there was an immense and undeniable power. I had stood my ground, and in doing so, I had not only saved a man's life, but I had reclaimed the value of my own. The land doesn't care about your family name or your career. It doesn't recognize status or wealth. It demands respect, humility, and knowledge. It has its own ancient and unforgiving rules. And what I learned through all of this is that the quietest skills, the ones born of patience and observation, are often the most powerful ones you can possess. The world might not always see their value, but that doesn't make them any less vital. In the end, what truly matters isn't the life you show to others, but the strength you find within yourself. Being underestimated can feel like a curse, but sometimes it's a hidden superpower. It gives you the space to grow, to learn, to become strong in the shadows without the pressure of anyone's expectations. And then, when the storm comes, you're the one who knows how to walk through it. I'd love to hear from you all now. Share your own story in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated? How did you prove them wrong? Or more importantly, how did you prove your own worth to yourself? Your stories are what make this community so special. If my story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when it matters most. Sharing this video with someone who might need to hear this message would also mean so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey, for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to recognize the quiet, powerful skills within yourselves